The candles burned low, their flames trembling against the August heat. When 12 voices gathered at the long oak table began their final meal. Silverware clinked, wine shimmered like liquid ruby. In less than 1 hour, laughter would collapse into silence. History rarely warns us before it turns. Tonight it would turn with the hand of an 18-year-old enslaved girl, a daughter born in captivity, who had decided that the only path to freedom was paved with poison. Why does this matter? Because this is not just a story about one supper in the American South. It is a story about what happens when power believes itself untouchable, and how even the most overlooked hand in the room can tip the scales of fate. The year was 1849. The plantation lay 3 miles outside Savannah, Georgia, where the river bent like a crooked finger through the swamp. Cicadas screamed in the trees. The air smelled of roasted duck, magnolia blossoms, and hidden under it all the faint metallic tang of arsenic. Her name, whispered later in courthouse records, was Eliza. She had lived her entire life on the property of Colonel Nathaniel Carter, a man of wealth and reputation, whose house stood 3 stories high, its white columns glaring like watchful eyes over 300 acres of cotton. To the world, Carter was respected. To those beneath his roof, he was feared. Eliza had grown up polishing silver that was never hers, pressing dresses she would never wear, and memorizing scripture she was forbidden to claim as her own. But she had also been listening in the kitchen to the doctor who explained dosages, listening to traders who joked about rat poison sold at the general store, listening when the mistress ordered flour, sugar, and spices, slipping small amounts of arsenic into the inventory with no suspicion at all. The house filled with celebration that night. The colonel's eldest son had returned from Charleston with his new wife. The family gathered for a feast to honor their fortune. Music drifted from the parlor. Children ran across polished floors. None of them noticed the young woman at the kitchen door, her face calm, her eyes sharp. "Eliza, bring the sauce," Margaret Carter called, gesturing toward the duck that steamed at the table's center. Eliza carried the dish forward, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. She knew what was inside. A reduction tinted not only with wine, but with the powder she had been collecting for 3 months, hidden in a hollowed gourd behind sacks of cornmeal. Enough to kill, not enough to taste. The clock in the hall chimed 7 times, each toll hanging heavy in the humid air. It sounded less like a clock and more like a funeral bell. A 6-year-old boy wrinkled his nose at the vegetables. "These taste strange," he said. His grandmother scolded him to eat. No one suspected the truth that every plate carried a fraction of Eliza's plan. The family spoke of cotton yields, of neighbors, of church sermons. The colonel raised his glass for a toast. To prosperity, to family, to the order God himself has given. His words slurred slightly, but no one thought it odd. He was on his 3rd glass of wine. By 7:45, the first child vomited onto the lace tablecloth. His mother rushed forward, only to stumble herself, gripping the chair for balance. The colonel's face flushed purple. He tried to stand, then fell forward into the roasted duck. One by one, like dominoes, the Carters began to convulse. "Eliza!" Margaret Carter's voice rasped, a single word cutting through the chaos. The name echoed through the hall, but Eliza was already gone. Chairs overturned, plates shattered. Children cried out. Mothers gasped for air. Fathers clawed at their throats. The supper room, once filled with polished order, became a battlefield of invisible warfare. And in the kitchen, 6 enslaved workers paused. They heard the screams. They saw the bell pulled frantically to summon them, but they did not move. They continued folding linens, washing dishes, pretending not to hear. What would you have done? Would you have rushed to help, risking punishment later? Or would you have waited, silent, as the masters learned the taste of their own cruelty? 8 o'clock came. The smell of magnolia was overtaken by vomit and sweat. The polished floor grew slick. Outside, the swamp frogs croaked, as though nothing inside had changed. Eliza was already slipping through the back path toward the river, a bundle under her arm. Inside it, 37 stolen dollars, a forged pass naming her a free woman, and one small vial, the last of her arsenic, held back in case of capture. By 8:15, the dining room looked like a portrait of ruin. Colonel Carter lay face first in his birthday cake. Margaret's hands shook as she reached for her son's. The children screamed, then fell silent. One by one, the grandfather clock ticked steadily, uncaring, each sound a nail in the coffin of the Carter line. But here's what no official record captured. The enslaved men and women in the quarters sat outside their cabins that night, listening. Some whispered prayers. Others smiled quietly, knowing justice had finally touched the big house. One old man who had lost 3 fingers to the colonel's whip shook his head and muttered, "The Lord sends justice in strange ways." Justice had come by supper, but Eliza's plan did not end with one poisoned family. She had learned patience, calculation. She had mapped her escape as carefully as she had measured each dose. Where was she headed? Who would she trust? And could one young woman really outrun the fury of a county determined to see her hanged? The night was only beginning. The night air outside the Carter plantation was heavy with sound. Crickets screeched from the grass. The river lapped against its muddy bank. Somewhere, a whippoorwill called, its lonely cry carrying across the dark fields. Beneath it all, Eliza's footsteps pressed into soft earth, each step deliberate, each breath sharp with fear and hope mixed. One house fell silent. The world stayed loud. The stakes could not have been higher. The death of a single planter was enough to summon dogs, riders, and ropes. But 12? The county would erupt like fire over dry cane. Every enslaved person within miles would face suspicion. Every door slammed tighter. Every pass questioned twice. If Eliza failed to vanish quickly, her fate would not just be death. It would be an example. Her bundle weighed light in her arms. 37 stolen dollars, forged papers, written with a hand she had practiced in soot and water on the back of the kitchen door until each letter curled like a master's script, and a dress, plain and brown, to replace the kitchen apron she still wore. She moved quickly toward the river path she had memorized since childhood. The swamps outside Savannah were no stranger to her. As a girl, she had gathered herbs here for remedies and stews, trailing behind old Ruth, the midwife who whispered, "The land hides us better than walls ever could." Tonight, the land became her shield. Spanish moss hung like curtains, damp and cold against her face. Mud pulled at her shoes. The smell of rot, salt, and night-blooming jasmine wrapped around her like a cloak. By 9 o'clock, lanterns flared across the plantation yard. Voices shouted. Dogs barked, sharp and urgent. They had discovered the bodies. The colonel's overseer, a man named Brandt, ordered riders to scour the property. "Find the girl," he yelled, though her name was not yet on every tongue. Brandt had always called her the cook, as if stripping her of identity gave him power. But power had shifted. Eliza crouched low in the reeds as hoofbeats thundered past on the road above. The riders carried torches that threw leaping shadows against the trees. For a moment, she saw the glint of steel shackles hanging from one man's saddlebag. They were not riding to question her. They were riding to claim her. She waited, silent, until the night swallowed the sound of hooves. Then she waded knee-deep into the marsh, letting the water mask her scent from the dogs. Ruth's voice echoed in memory. "When they hunt you, child, don't leave yourself to their noses. Leave yourself to the river." The Savannah River stretched wide and dark ahead. Its surface shimmered faintly under a slice of moon, carrying barges, ferries, and sometimes fugitives who never made it to the other side. Eliza's bundle held no boat. But she knew the crossing point, a ferry dock used by traders moving cotton bales downstream. By midnight, she would be there, if luck held. Yet luck was a fragile thread. Behind her, in the great house, Margaret Carter still clung to life. Her voice, weakened but fierce, rasped out Eliza's name to the overseer. Witnesses later claimed she gasped, "The cook, she has done this." Whether true or not, it was enough. By 10 o'clock, every rider in Chatham County was told to search for an 18-year-old enslaved girl with quick eyes and a burn scar on her left wrist. Her description spread faster than she could walk. At 10:30, Eliza reached the dock. The ferry was there, tied by thick ropes, its hull smelling of tar and riverweed. A lone black man in work clothes sat nearby, sharpening a knife by lantern light. She froze, ready to turn back, but then he lifted his head and whispered, "Password?" Her heart pounded. This was the moment Ruth had promised. A network older than any law, whispered from lips to lips, built in shadows. Eliza answered with the phrase she had been taught. "The Jordan runs north." The man nodded once. "Then you ride." He cut the rope, guiding her aboard with 3 others hidden beneath sacks of flour. 2 men, 1 woman, all with faces carved by fear. The ferry pushed off into the current. The water slapped against its side like impatient hands. Savannah's lights glowed faintly behind them, a smear of yellow in the mist. Ahead lay only darkness. The ferryman rowed hard, his muscles straining against the pull. Midway across, dogs barked on the far bank. Torches flared, voices shouted orders. A bullet cracked the night, striking water close enough to spray Eliza's face. She clutched the bundle tighter, her throat raw with unscreamed terror. Would they make it? Or would the river claim them before freedom ever had a chance? The boat slid into reeds on the opposite shore. Just as more shots rang out, the ferryman hissed, "Run!" They scrambled into the trees, mud sucking at their heels. The ferryman pushed the ferry back into the current, sending it drifting downstream, a decoy, drawing pursuers with it. Eliza's group plunged into the forest, following a narrow path lined with pine needles and wet earth. The smell of resin clung heavy. Their breaths came ragged. The woman ahead stumbled, then rose again, whispering, "Keep moving, Lord, keep us moving." By 1 in the morning, they reached a safe house, a low cabin, hidden beneath a canopy of live oaks. Its windows shuttered tight. The door creaked open at a coded knock. Inside, the scent of burning fat and wood smoke filled the air. A woman in a plain dress, her hair wrapped in a kerchief, ushered them in. "You're safe for tonight," she said. "Tomorrow, you ride north." For the first time in hours, Eliza's body sagged against the wall. She had done it. She had left behind the screams, the dining room chaos, the Colonel's final toast. But survival was not freedom. Survival was only the first step. At dawn, news would spread like wildfire. 12 Carters dead at supper. A runaway girl suspected. A county armed and restless. Already, riders were tightening nets on the roads, patrols stationed at river crossings, rewards whispered in taverns. And somewhere in those woods, an 18-year-old girl sat by a dying fire, her scarred hand clutching forged papers, knowing that every hour bought was another hour the world gave her to vanish. She had crossed 1 river, but how many rivers remained? The morning sun was not yet up when hoofbeats thundered again, closer this time. The cabin went silent. A baby whimpered, quickly hushed. Shadows moved past the window, men searching, sniffing out trails. Would the safe house hold, or would Eliza's flight end here, before it had truly begun? The answer waited in the pounding of fists against the cabin door. The hunt had found her. The hunt had only begun. The pounding at the cabin door rattled the thin wood, each blow like a verdict waiting to fall. Smoke from the hearth drifted upward, bitter with animal fat. and every creak of the rafters seemed to betray the fugitives crouched inside. Eliza held her breath, her scarred wrist pressed against her bundle, her heart counting faster than the clock. Outside, a voice barked, "Open up! Sheriff's men! We're searching every house!" The woman who had welcomed them in her name was Annabelle. Glanced once at the fugitives, her face expressionless, then went to the door. She unlatched it slowly. Cold dawn air swept in, carrying the smell of horse sweat and gunpowder. 3 riders stood in the clearing, their torches sputtering. Behind them, the sheriff's deputy, William Brandt, sat high in the saddle, his jaw tight, his coat dusted with river mud. Brandt had overseen the Carter plantation for 7 years. He knew every worker by face, every child by name, every scar he himself had ordered. He also knew Eliza, and though Margaret Carter's dying words were weak, they were enough to ignite his obsession. Find the cook. Make her pay. Annabelle's voice trembled, but only slightly. Morning, officers. What brings you out so early? You know damn well, Brandt snapped. Carter's dead. All of 'em. Poisoned at supper. We're looking for a girl. 18, scar on her wrist. You seen anyone? Annabelle shook her head. Ain't no one here but me and the little ones. You can look if you wish. She stepped aside, letting torchlight spill into the one-room cabin. Eliza crouched low behind a pile of firewood stacked near the hearth. Smoke and soot masked her scent, her skin slick with sweat. The other fugitives pressed themselves against shadows. A baby whimpered again. Eliza closed her eyes, praying it would not rise louder. Brandt dismounted, his boots crunching over pine needles as he stepped inside. His torch threw harsh light across the cabin. He scanned quickly. Wooden table, straw pallets, children huddled in blankets. His eyes lingered on the firewood. Eliza did not move, not a breath. Then the baby cried louder, a thin wail. Brandt turned sharply, suspicion hardening his face. But Annabelle moved faster. She scooped up the child, rocking him against her shoulder, her voice a lull. Hush now, Samuel, hush. Just teethin', she said. Always loud come morning. The distraction worked. Brandt grunted, spit on the floorboards, and waved his men out. She'll turn up, he muttered, and when she does, there'll be no mercy. The horses' hooves faded into the distance. Silence fell again. The fugitives exhaled in unison, relief washing over them like cool water. Not safe? Not yet. At daybreak, Annabelle whispered instructions. You can't stay. They'll circle back. Head north before the sun's high. There's a Quaker farm 5 miles on. Ask for Josiah. Passwords, the lamb walks free. He'll know. Eliza thanked her with a nod. Words would have cracked under the weight of what had just passed. They set off through the woods, the ground still damp from night mist. Pine needles crunched softly underfoot. Birds stirred in the branches. The fugitives walked single file, every ear tuned to the echo of hounds or hooves. By noon, word of the Carter family's poisoning had reached Savannah proper. The courthouse bell rang twice, summoning officials. Broadside notices appeared by afternoon. Reward offered. $200 for capture of runaway cook. Name Eliza, age 18. Small scar on wrist. Suspected murderer. $200 was more than most farmers earned in a year. Now, every man with a horse and a gun had reason to join the chase. The net tightened. Josiah's farm came into view by mid-afternoon. The place looked ordinary faded white barn, rows of corn swaying in the breeze, smell of manure, and earth thick in the air. But when Eliza gave the password, Josiah ushered them into the hayloft. Rest quick, he whispered. By nightfall, wagons go north. Stay low till then. In the loft, dust floated like golden motes in the light slanting through cracks. Eliza lay still, staring at the beams above her head. For the first time, exhaustion hit hard. She thought of the dining room, the spilled wine, the Colonel collapsing face first, Margaret's rasped cry of her name. The memory pressed like a stone on her chest. Had she gone too far? Had she not gone far enough? What would you have done? If your whole life had been chained by someone else's law, would you have chosen patience or poison? At sundown, Josiah hitched 2 wagons. One carried barrels of apples bound for Augusta. The fugitives climbed into hidden compartments beneath. Hay scratched their skin, the air hot and close. The wheels rolled forward, each turn carrying them farther from the Carter estate, but not beyond reach. Because Brant had not given up, that night, he convened a meeting at the courthouse. Plantation owners crowded the chamber, their faces pale with fear. "If a girl can poison a whole house," one said, "what stops the others from trying the same?" Another muttered, "This is rebellion. Make an example of her." Brant slammed his fist on the table. "I'll find her, even if it takes the devil's hand to do it." The search expanded. Riders fanned through back roads. Ferries were checked, passengers interrogated. By morning, slave catchers from Charleston had joined, men with hounds trained to follow a week-old scent. And in the hay wagon, rattling northward, Eliza heard every hoofbeat in her mind. Every bark echoed inside her chest. She pressed the vial hidden in her bodice, the last of her arsenic, against her ribs. If they caught her, she knew what she must do. By dawn, the wagon stopped at a crossroad inn. Josiah spoke quietly through the slats. "Rest here. The next driver takes you farther. Keep moving, always north." Eliza stepped out into the crisp morning. The inn smelled of stale beer, wood smoke, and horses. Men lingered at the porch, muttering over newspapers already carrying the Carter story. "Whole family dead at supper," one said. "Cook did it, they reckon." Another shook his head. "Makes you wonder what's in your own stew tonight?" Eliza turned away quickly, pulling her kerchief lower over her face. The world was already hunting her with words as well as dogs, but Josiah's voice called her back. "You keep your courage, girl. Roads are long, but freedom's longer." Freedom! The wagon rolled again, heading toward Augusta. Behind them, riders scoured the countryside, sniffing out every whisper. And one whisper had already betrayed her, for in Savannah, a stable boy from the Carter plantation had spoken under pressure. He swore he saw Eliza heading toward the river with a bundle. The hunt had a direction now, and Brant was closing fast. The wagon creaked along a rutted road as dawn broke over Georgia's pine hills. Sunlight spilled through branches, dappling the fugitives hidden beneath hay. The smell of damp straw and horse sweat mixed with dust, choking the air inside the compartment. Eliza pressed her ear to the wooden slats, straining to hear the rhythm of hooves beyond the wheels. Each beat on the earth sounded like pursuit. One day had passed since the Carter supper turned to silence. By now, the county knew her name. By now, her face was a bounty. The stakes sharpened with every mile. Freedom was not a place, yet it was distance, deception, and endurance. If the riders closed in, distance shrank. If her disguise failed, deception collapsed. And endurance? That was measured heartbeat to heartbeat. By mid-morning, the wagon reached Augusta, a bustling market town alive with the sound of traders shouting, pigs squealing, and wheels grinding over cobblestone. The air smelled of roasted peanuts, manure, and the metallic tang of river iron from blacksmith shops. The driver pulled into a stable yard, unloading barrels of apples. Eliza and the others waited until the coast was clear, then slipped into the back alley, where a man in a dark coat waited. His name was Harper, another link in the chain. He gestured them into a cellar beneath a bakery, where the yeasty scent of fresh bread masked the stench of sweat and fear. "You'll ride with me at nightfall," Harper whispered. "Daylight's too dangerous now. Brant's men search every road." Eliza nodded, though her stomach clenched at the mention of Brant. She had not seen his face since the plantation, but she felt him as if he were always one step behind. Upstairs, the bakery bustled with life. Customers ordered loaves. Children pressed their noses to the glass jars of candy. No one noticed the fugitives crouched beneath their feet. Yet rumors swirled as freely as flour. "Carter family's all gone," one man said over the counter. "Cook did it. They say she used rat poison. This calls an L." "And Matey the Deckard," another spat. "Makes you wonder what your own cook's stirring." "I don't trust 'em." Fear was spreading faster than fire through dry cane. Plantation owners ordered servants watched. Kitchens were locked at night. Some families even made children taste food before the masters dared touch a plate. Suspicion had become seasoning at every meal. But suspicion wasn't enough for Brant. He wanted proof. He wanted blood. At the Savannah courthouse, he laid out the evidence. The stable boy's testimony, the missing girl, the fact that Clara Carter's last word had been Eliza. It was enough to raise the bounty. $500 now. Enough to make strangers hunt as hard as kin. He hired professional trackers from Charleston, men who carried long rifles and packs of dogs with noses trained on the scent of fugitives. Brant gave them Eliza's scarf, stolen from her pallet in the Carter kitchen. The hounds bayed as if they already knew the trail. By nightfall in Augusta, Harper led Eliza and the others from the cellar to a small covered wagon. "We ride north," he said. "Toward Athens first, then maybe Tennessee if we're lucky." The road stretched black under a silver moon. Frogs croaked from the ditches. The wagon rocked and groaned, its canvas top flapping in the wind. Inside, Eliza clutched her bundle tighter. $37, forged papers, and the vial of arsenic, her safety net, her weapon, her curse. At midnight, the hounds found their scent. Far behind them, deep in the woods, a chorus of baying broke the night silence. Eliza's body went cold. Harper's hands tightened on the reins. "Ride fast," he muttered. "They're on us." The wagon jolted forward, wheels rattling over roots and stones. The fugitives clung to each other to keep from tumbling out. The horses snorted, their breath steaming. The dogs grew louder, closer. Would the wagon outrun them? Or would the night end with ropes in the trees? Harper turned sharply onto a narrow track, branches clawing at the canvas. The smell of pine sap filled the air. "Hold on," he growled. But the hounds were relentless. Their baying rose higher, fevered, until Eliza could almost feel their teeth at her ankles. Then, suddenly, silence. The wagon lurched to a stop. Harper leapt down, pressing a finger to his lips. They listened. Only frogs and wind. The dogs had lost the trail. "How?" whispered one of the men. Eliza's hand went instinctively to her bundle. The vial was warm against her skin. Pepper, turpentine, the tricks Ruth had taught her. Scatter these along the trail to confuse the hounds. She had poured a line behind them when the wagon jolted. Desperation turned into foresight. The fugitives rested in a grove until dawn. Sleep was impossible. Every crack of twig felt like a pursuer's step. Every rustle of leaves felt like a hand reaching out of the dark. And in a town 2 miles south, Brant stood in the torchlight, cursing the ground where the hounds had gone silent. His men fanned out, but the forest yielded nothing. "She's clever," he muttered, "but clever won't save her long." By morning, Harper's wagon rolled into Athens. The college bells tolled 6, their notes bright against the mist. Students hurried across cobbled streets, books in hand, oblivious to the fugitives hidden under rough cloth. The scent of ink and roasting coffee drifted from open windows. Eliza peered out through a slit in the canvas. For a heartbeat, she imagined herself walking freely among the students, a book under her arm. Her mind used for something more than planning escape, but reality pressed back. She was still hunted, still nameless, still the cook who poisoned 12. That afternoon, as they hid in a barn on the edge of town, Harper returned with grim news. "Brant's here, asking questions, showing your description." Eliza's stomach dropped. "They're close," Harper continued. "Too close. We can't stay. Tonight we ride again northwest. This time, toward the mountains." The fugitives exchanged weary glances. The mountains meant harsher roads, colder nights. But mountains also meant cover, distance, a chance. As dusk fell, Eliza walked briefly to the edge of a creek near the barn. The water smelled of iron and moss. She knelt, splashing her face, watching ripples distort her reflection. Her eyes looked older than 18, older than anyone should be. Behind her, the others murmured prayers. She whispered none. Instead, she touched the vial hidden beneath her dress. It was not prayer that steadied her. It was resolve. The mountains loomed in the distance, their outlines black against the fading sky. But in Athens, Brant mounted his horse again, his eyes scanning every road, every alley, every face. He had not slept in 2 days. He would not sleep until Eliza's neck snapped under a noose. The net was tightening, and Eliza was running out of road. The Blue Ridge Mountains rose ahead, like a wall carved by God himself. Their peaks were veiled in mist, the air sharper, colder than the lowland swamps Eliza had known all her life. Pines thickened on the slopes, their resinous scent mixing with wet stone and wood smoke drifting from scattered cabins. Every sound carried farther up here: the scrape of wagon wheels on rock, the bark of a dog in some unseen hollow, the echo of boots on a trail. It was late September, 1849. Harper's wagon crawled up a twisting mountain road under moonlight, its horses straining against the incline. Inside, the fugitives huddled beneath burlap sacks, every jolt threatening to toss them into the open. Their breaths turned white in the cold, their bodies unused to the mountain air. Eliza pressed her bundle tight against her chest, the small vial inside seeming heavier with every mile. Freedom was supposed to feel lighter, yet the higher they climbed, the more it weighed. The stakes could not be clearer now. If caught in these mountains, there would be no court, no trial, only tree limbs strong enough to hold a rope. At dawn, Harper pulled off the road into a clearing, where a cabin leaned crooked against the slope. Chickens scattered at their approach, and the smell of smoke and boiled cornmeal hung in the air. The door opened to reveal an old man with a beard gone white, his back bent but his eyes keen. "You're late," he said. "Roads were thick with riders," Harper replied. "Brant's close." The old man called Moses nodded. He ushered them inside, where quilts patched with 100 colors covered the walls to keep out the mountain cold. The fugitives collapsed by the hearth, grateful for warmth. The crackle of fire was loud after nights spent listening for hounds. Moses ladled cornmeal porridge into bowls. The smell was plain but comforting. As they ate, he spoke softly. "Word has spread. Carter family dead. Folks whisper your name, girl. Some call you murderer. Others call you Moses' own child, leading your people out." His eyes fixed on Eliza. "Which are you?" Eliza swallowed hard, unsure of her own answer. Murderer, deliverer, survivor, perhaps all three. By mid-morning, Brant's riders were climbing the same mountain road. Their hounds bayed, noses pressed to the ground. The sheriff's deputy rode at their head, his face gaunt from lack of sleep, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "She's near," he growled. "I can feel it." Inside Moses's cabin, the fugitives heard the dogs before they saw them. The sound rolled through the valley, closer with every heartbeat. Moses did not flinch. He handed Eliza a coarse wool cloak. "Take the north trail," he instructed. "It winds to the ridge, hard walking, but it'll hide your tracks. Go now. Don't look back." The fugitives slipped into the woods, the earth damp beneath their feet, the air smelling of pine and wet leaves. They scrambled upward, branches whipping their faces, the trail vanishing and reappearing like a riddle. Behind them, the hounds howled louder, the sound bouncing from rock to rock, until it seemed to come from every direction at once. At noon, the trail narrowed to a ledge overlooking a sheer drop. Wind roared through the gorge, carrying the scent of moss and wildflowers clinging to stone. One misstep, and freedom would end in silence far below. The fugitives edged carefully along the ledge, hands pressed to the rock. Eliza's heart pounded so hard it drowned out the wind. Halfway across, a loose stone tumbled from beneath her shoe, clattering into the abyss. She froze, breath caught in her throat. A question throbbed in her skull. Was this the price of vengeance? To trade one suffocating bondage for another kind of edge, always one step from falling? Behind them, the hounds erupted in fresh frenzy. Brant's men had found the lower path. Shouts carried upward. There, on the ridge, the fugitives scrambled faster. At the far end of the ledge, the trail widened again into dense thickets of laurel and rhododendron. Their waxy leaves brushed Eliza's face, hiding them from view, their fragrance heavy and sweet. The cover gave them one more breath of safety. They pressed on until dusk, climbing higher. The forest grew darker, colder, the silence broken only by owls calling from the trees. When they finally stopped, it was in a hollow where a spring bubbled clear from the rocks. They drank greedily, water cold as glass against their throats, but rest brought no peace. Brant's men would not stop. They had food, horses, fire. Eliza and the others had only their feet, their fear, and the faint thread of the underground railroad stretching north. That night, as the others slept fitfully on beds of pine needles, Eliza sat awake, her back against a tree. She pulled out the vial, its glass glinting in the moonlight. One swallow, and capture would never come. One swallow, and Brant would never see her chained. But one swallow would also end the chance of reaching the border, of finding a life beyond the shadows. Her mother's voice rose in memory soft, almost forgotten. Hold on, child. Even chains rust someday. She tucked the vial away. Not yet. At dawn, the fugitives resumed their climb. The trail wound past waterfalls, thundering into pools, their spray cold and metallic against the skin. The roar of water masked every sound, so when a gunshot cracked above them, it was almost drowned out. Almost. A branch splintered inches from Eliza's shoulder. She dropped flat, heart hammering. Another shot rang out. Brant's men had spotted movement in the trees. The fugitives scattered. Eliza bolted uphill, lungs burning, branches tearing at her cloak. Shouts rose behind her, dogs bayed, gunfire echoed. She crashed through undergrowth until the forest opened onto a cliffside plateau. The valley stretched below, blue with haze, endless. She was cornered. The wind whipped her cloak, her hair, her breath. She turned to see two riders emerging from the trees, rifles raised. Brant was among them, his eyes burning with triumph. "It's over," he called, his voice carrying across the rocks. "You can't run forever, girl. Come quietly, and maybe the rope will be quick." Eliza's hand went to her bundle, to the vial pressed against her chest. Freedom or death. The choice hovered like the wind at her back. But before she could move, a horn sounded from the valley below. Long, low, and deliberate. Brant's face twisted. Another signal, not his own. The fugitives were not alone. The mountains held allies he had not counted on, and the hunt was about to turn. The horn echoed across the ridge, low and steady, like a warning buried in the mountain's bones. Brant's horse reared at the sound. His men shifted uneasily, rifles still trained on Eliza. The hounds, once frantic, fell silent, their ears cocked toward the valley. Then came the second signal, 3 short blasts, sharp as hammer strikes. Brant's face darkened. "Damn Quakers," he muttered. "They've taken her side." Eliza stood on the plateau, wind snapping at her cloak, heart pounding. She did not know who had blown the horn, only that it had stolen the certainty from Brant's voice. She edged back toward the rocks, buying seconds. The forest below stirred. Figures emerged from the laurel thickets, 5 men, plain in dress but firm in step. They carried no rifles, only staffs and lanterns. Their leader, a tall man with a broad-brimmed hat, raised a hand. "Deputy," he called. His voice carried calm authority. "You've no right to claim this girl on Quaker land." Brant spat. "She poisoned 12 white souls. You'd harbor a killer?" The Quaker's reply was measured. "I harbor the oppressed. God alone will judge her sins, not the rope you bring." For a moment, silence clung to the mountain like mist. The choice lay balanced between bullets and belief. Eliza's stomach twisted. Allies or not, she knew Brant would not yield. Men like him fed on control, and she had stripped it from him in the most unforgivable way. Brant dismounted, rifle steady. "Step aside, preacher. This ends here." But the Quakers did not move. Their lanterns swung gently in the wind, light catching their resolute faces. Behind Brant, one of his riders muttered, "Too many eyes, sir. If we shoot, word'll spread. Folks'll turn." Brant's jaw tightened. He hated hesitation. He hated witnesses. But even he knew killing unarmed men of faith could backfire. His fury turned sharp toward Eliza. "Run," he snarled. "Run north. It won't matter. I'll find you again." He yanked his horse around, spurred it hard. The men and dogs followed, their curses fading into the trees. Eliza's knees buckled with relief. She gripped the rock for balance, the vial in her bundle pressing cold against her ribs. She was still alive, still free, at least for another night. The Quaker leader approached, his lantern painting gold across his weathered face. "Come," he said softly. "You've far yet to go." They guided her down hidden trails, narrow paths where moss-muffled footsteps and waterfalls drowned pursuit. The smell of damp earth and wood smoke thickened as the group descended into a valley where a meeting house stood, plain white boards gleaming in the moonlight. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax candles and cedar. Other fugitives huddled there, 2 women with children, an older man missing a leg. They looked up as Eliza entered, eyes wide with shared fear and recognition. She was not alone. That night, by the hearth, bread and milk were passed quietly. No one asked questions. But as silence stretched, the Quaker leader, whose name was Elias, spoke low to Eliza. "You've stirred more than one supper table, haven't you?" Eliza's head snapped up, startled. "What do you mean?" He drew a folded paper from his pocket. "Word travels faster than riders when the oppressed are listening." This was taken from a planter's desk in South Carolina. "We know." The document listed suspicious deaths. A Henderson patriarch dead after a sudden ailment in 1847. A Lancaster daughter fallen sick from summer fever in 1848. Each note carried whispers of poisoning. Each family had once owned Eliza. Her pulse raced. He knew. He knew she had not struck only once. "You've carried vengeance house to house," Elias said, his eyes searching hers. "Some would call that justice. Some would call it wrath." Eliza clenched her hands until her nails dug her palms. "They sold my mother. They sold my sisters. I learned what I could, used what I had. And now?" Elias asked. "Will you keep serving poison until none are left? Or will you serve another kind of table?" His words coiled in her mind long after the meeting house grew still. She lay awake on a straw pallet, the fire's glow flickering. Every face she had poisoned rose in memory, the colonel slumping into his duck, the children convulsing, the cries echoing like church bells in her skull. Was she deliverer or destroyer? Outside, owls hooted. Dogs barked distantly. The hunt was not over. Brant would not rest. At dawn, Elias roused the fugitives. "We move north," he said, "to Tennessee, then Ohio. Freedom waits beyond the river. They set out in silence, their footsteps crunching frost on the ground. The air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. The sun broke through clouds, gilding the mountain ridges, but on the far side of the valley, riders gathered again. Brant had doubled his men, spreading like wolves across the slopes. He had sworn an oath. No matter how far she ran, Eliza would not escape. By midday, the fugitives reached a ravine. Water rushed below, its roar deafening. A narrow log bridge spanned the chasm, slick with moss. Elias urged them across one by one. Eliza went last, her cloak whipping in the wind, the river thundering beneath her. Halfway across, a gunshot cracked. The log shuddered as bark splintered near her feet. Brant's men had found them again. "Run!" Elias shouted. Eliza sprinted, arms outstretched for balance, the world narrowing to the slick curve of the log and the river's roar. Another shot, another splinter. She leapt the final gap, landing hard on the far bank. The fugitives scattered into the trees. Eliza glanced back once Brant on horseback, rifle raised, his eyes burning with hate across the gorge. His voice carried above the water. "No river will save you, girl. I'll hunt you to the ends of this earth." Eliza's breath tore in her throat. Her legs ached, but her will burned hotter than fear. For now, she had escaped again. But rivers could be crossed, and the next crossing would decide everything. The Tennessee River glimmered under a waning moon, its surface silver and restless, as though the water itself carried secrets. Frogs croaked from the marshy banks. A breeze rolled cold across the current, bringing the smell of fish and wet reeds. For Eliza, standing on the southern shore in late October of 1849, the river was not just water. It was the line between life and death. 7 weeks had passed since the Carter supper turned to silence. 7 weeks of flight, of barns and cellars, of lantern signals and whispered passwords. Now the river stretched before her, wide and fast, the final barrier before the network of safe houses leading north into Ohio. Beyond it lay the chance of a new name, new work, perhaps even a life where her scarred wrist no longer branded her in every crowd. The stakes pressed against her like the current pressing against its banks. One misstep on this crossing, and the river would bear her back not to shore, but to the gallows. Elias, the Quaker who had guided them through the mountains, crouched at the bank beside her. "We'll wait until midnight," he whispered. "Patrol's slack then. There's a ferryman who owes us trust." Eliza nodded, though her chest felt hollow. The river smelled like freedom, but it also smelled like a grave. She thought of Ruth's old words, "Leave yourself to the river." But did Ruth mean to trust its mercy or its depth? Behind them, the fugitives huddled in silence. A mother rocked her infant, humming low to keep it calm. The sound blended with the rustle of reeds, a fragile thread of humanity against the dark. Then, in the distance, a hound bayed. One voice, then a chorus. Eliza's blood went cold. Brant had found them again. The riders arrived before midnight, torches bobbing like angry stars through the trees. Their shouts grew louder. "Surround the bank. Don't let 'em cross." Brant's voice cut through the night like a blade. The fugitives panicked. Some ran for the trees. Others clutched each other, frozen between fight and surrender. Elias seized Eliza's arm. Now, into the boat, a flat-bottomed skiff, lay half hidden in the reeds, its oars ready. Eliza and 2 others scrambled in as Elias shoved it into the current. The boat rocked, the cold slap of water against its sides. The ferryman, a gaunt figure with sharp eyes, bent low and pulled hard at the oars. The river swallowed them quickly, carrying them away from shore. Behind, torches flared along the bank. Brant's men shouted. Shots cracked, bullets smacking water, splashing dangerously close. Eliza ducked low, clutching her bundle tight, every nerve alive with terror. Halfway across, The current surged stronger. The boat pitched. One fugitive screamed as water poured over the side. Eliza grabbed the oar, helping the ferryman pull, muscles burning. The river smelled of iron and mud, its spray stinging her lips. "Faster!" Elias hissed. On the southern bank, Brant rode his horse into the shallows, his rifle raised. The torchlight revealed his face gaunt, furious, relentless. His voice carried over the water. "You can't wash blood clean in that river, girl. I'll see you hang, if it's the last thing I do." Eliza's body shook, not from cold, but from the weight of his words. She pulled harder at the oar. Teeth gritted. The boat lurched forward. The opposite bank loomed closer, dark with willow trees. But then the hounds. Somehow, the riders had driven them downstream. The dogs plunged into the water, paddling furiously, teeth snapping. Their baying echoed across the river. Panic surged in Eliza's chest. One dog reached the boat, claws scraping wood. She swung the oar, striking its muzzle. It yelped, fell back, but others came fast. The ferryman cursed, rowing with everything he had. Elias shouted prayers. Bullets cracked again. One fugitive slumped, struck in the shoulder, groaning. Blood mingled with river water, dark as ink. Would the river save them or claim them? Then the current shifted, pulling the skiff into a back eddy. The ferryman steered sharply. The boat spun, scraping against roots, before sliding into reeds on the northern shore. They had made it barely. Elias leapt out, dragging the wounded man with him. Elias stumbled onto the bank, legs trembling, breath ragged. The ground smelled of mud and wet leaves, solid and real. She had crossed, but even as relief washed over her, Brant's voice echoed across the river. "Run, girl, run north. Every mile you gain, I'll take back double. You hear me?" His torchlight burned on the opposite shore, refusing to fade. His vow felt heavier than any chain. The fugitive staggered into the woods, guided by Elias toward the next safe house. Eliza's mind churned with every step. She had crossed rivers, mountains, towns, but Brant's shadow stretched longer than any road. Could freedom truly exist if a man's obsession hunted her through every valley? By dawn, they reached a farmhouse. The smell of wood smoke and bread greeted them. A kind-faced woman opened the door, ushering them inside. The hearth glowed warm, quilts covered the walls, and for a moment, Eliza's body sagged, surrendering to rest. But rest brought no peace. In her dreams, the Carter dining room reappeared, the spilled wine, the clatter of silver, the colonel's final toast cut short. Every face she had poisoned rose, their eyes wide, mouths gasping. They reached for her, not with hatred, but with questions. What had she become? Avenger? Survivor? Murderer? She woke with a start, the vial still pressed to her chest. By late afternoon, word reached the farmhouse. Patrols were searching north of the river. Posters nailed to tavern doors carried her name. $500 reward. Enough to buy land. Enough to tempt even allies. The woman who sheltered them whispered urgently, "You can't linger. Next stop is Kentucky. Beyond that, Ohio. But every step will be watched." That night, Eliza stared into the hearth's embers, the crackle of fire loud in the quiet room. The others slept, their breaths slow. Elias sat across from her, his Bible open but unread. Finally, he spoke. "Every man hunts you for what you've done, but what will you do with what you've yet to live?" The question struck harder than Brant's threats. Eliza had thought only of escape, of one more mile, one more night. She had never asked herself what came after. What would freedom mean if she carried chains in her own chest? The fire hissed. The wind moaned outside, and in the distance, faint but certain, a hound bayed again. The river had not stopped Brant. The final reckoning was still ahead. Snow fell lightly over Kentucky in early November of 1849. dusting the fields in white silence. The air bit at Eliza's cheeks, sharp as knives, her breath pluming before her as she trudged along a frozen lane. The world felt stripped of color. Gray barns, black trees, pale sky. Each crunch of her shoes on ice carried like a drumbeat in the stillness. The safe house stood at the end of the lane, a brick farmhouse, its shutters green, a thin wisp of chimney smoke curling upward. The smell of wood and baking beans drifted faintly on the air. For a moment, Eliza's chest eased. She had walked through fire, water, mountains. Now only the Ohio River stood between her and freedom. But safety had teeth. Inside the farmhouse, she and Elias were ushered to a cellar where quilts lined the walls to keep out the cold. A lantern burned low, its flame steady, painting shadows across Eliza's scarred wrist. Other fugitives huddled nearby, whispering prayers. The host, a wiry man with nervous eyes, bolted the door behind him. Elias leaned close, his voice low. "We'll cross tomorrow night. The river's near frozen, but rafts still run." Eliza nodded, though her stomach twisted. Rivers had saved her before, but rivers also carried the weight of every chase. Upstairs, the farmhouse creaked with footsteps. A chair scraped. Voices murmured, too many voices. That night, Eliza could not sleep. Her dreams pulled her back into the Carter dining room. The silver goblets, the polished mahogany table, the smell of roasted duck. The faces blurred, then sharpened. The colonel's sudden slump, Margaret's trembling cry, the children's pale lips. Their eyes followed her into waking, accusing and pleading at once. She pressed her palm to her chest, where the vial still hid. Was this her shield or her curse? By morning, unease thickened. Elias noticed it too. "Something's wrong," he whispered. The farmhouse man avoided their eyes, his words clipped. He left the cellar door unlatched. By noon, riders gathered in the yard outside. Horses stamped, harnesses jingled. The smell of sweat and leather seeped through the floorboards. Eliza's breath froze in her throat. Brant had found them again. The door above slammed open. Boots pounded down the stairs. The cellar filled with torchlight and shouts. "There!" The fugitives scattered, but there was nowhere to run. Eliza's bundle tore open, coins spilling across the floor. Brant strode in, gaunt and wild-eyed, his rifle steady. He fixed on her instantly, as though all the others were ghosts. "Thought the river would keep you?" His voice rasped with triumph and hate. "You can't outrun what you've done. 12 graves, 12 ghosts. I'll see you join them." The cellar stank of smoke, fear, and betrayal. Eliza's hand went to her bodice, fingers closing around the vial. But Elias stepped forward, his voice strong. "Deputy Brant, you claim justice, yet you bring only vengeance. She is no longer yours to chain." Brant's eyes blazed. "She's poison. That's all she'll ever be." His finger tightened on the trigger. Time slowed. Eliza felt the vial's glass warm against her skin. The weight of every mile, every corpse, every night of flight pressing her into one choice: drink and deny Brant victory. Fight and risk the rope. Surrender and lose everything. But another sound cut through the cellar, the cry of a child. One of the fugitives' infants wailed, high and piercing. The sound startled Brant, his aim faltering for a breath. Elias lunged, striking the rifle aside. The shot split wood and stone, smoke choking the cellar. Chaos erupted. Fugitives shoved past, scrambling toward the stairs. Brant roared, swinging his rifle like a club. Eliza ducked, coins scattering underfoot. In the smoke and screaming, she slipped through the throng, heart hammering. Upstairs, the farmhouse blazed with confusion. Chairs overturned, lanterns shattered. A fire sparked, licking across the curtains. Eliza pushed through the heat and smoke, stumbling into the icy yard. Horses reared, riders shouted. The world tilted in flame and snow. She sprinted across the field, her breath tearing, her scarred wrist burning. Behind her, Brant burst through the door, his face lit by fire, eyes locked on hers. He chased her across the snow, each step pounding like a drum of judgment. At the river's edge, the Ohio stretched wide, chunks of ice drifting in the current. Moonlight painted the water like steel. Eliza's lungs seized. One more crossing, one more chance. She scrambled onto the raft moored there, shoving it loose. The wood smelled of pitch and frost. The current seized it, dragging it into the black water. Brant skidded onto the bank, rifle raised, his shout carrying across the night. "This isn't freedom. It's just running forever." Eliza clutched the oar, the vial still pressed against her ribs. Her answer was swallowed by the river's roar. The raft spun into the current, ice breaking around it. Bullets hissed, striking water, missing flesh. Brant's figure shrank on the bank, torchlight fading, his curses swallowed by distance. On the far shore, lanterns glowed faintly, waiting hands, waiting voices. The scent of smoke and bread carried faint across the water. Ohio, freedom. But the river was wide, the current merciless. Whether she reached that shore or vanished into the dark, history would never settle clearly. Some claimed she crossed, took a new name, lived quietly in Cincinnati until old age. Others swore she drowned that night, her body never found, her spirit haunting the river where the ice broke. Still others whispered she turned back, vowing vengeance until her last breath. The truth was never written clean, but the legend remained. The slave's daughter, only 18, who poisoned her master's family at supper and vanished into the night. And even now, some say that on cold autumn evenings along the Ohio, when the river runs high and the moon turns silver, you can hear the faint cry of hounds and the splash of a single oar cutting through the dark. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.